The rain wasn't the problem. It was the rhythm of it, a steady, mocking beat against the pavement that matched the throbbing in her ankle. Each step sent a fresh spike of pain up her leg, a punishment for being late, for being clumsy, for being here at all. Chloe kept her head down, the collar of her thin coat doing little to shield her from the relentless Tokyo drizzle. The dark purple dress, her one good one, felt damp and heavy against her skin. She was 20 minutes late. 20 minutes late for a man she'd never met, a man her friends swore was a good opportunity. She finally found the restaurant, a discreet monolith of dark wood and frosted glass tucked away in a Shinjuku side street. The name was etched in a single, severe line of kanji she couldn't read. Inside, the noise of the city vanished, replaced by a heavy, expensive silence. A hostess in a severe black kimono materialized from the shadows, her expression unreadable. "I have a reservation," Chloe began, her voice sounding small and breathless. "I'm meeting someone." The woman's eyes flickered over Chloe's damp coat, her slightly disheveled hair, and then, for a fraction of a second, down to her feet. Chloe instinctively tried to shift her weight, to hide the slight limp she couldn't suppress. "This way," the hostess said, her voice a cool, smooth stone. She led Chloe through a maze of quiet corridors, past private rooms screened by intricate shoji panels. The air smelled of cypress and something else, something clean and sharp like ozone after a storm. Finally, they stopped. The hostess slid a door open with practiced grace, bowed and retreated, leaving Chloe standing on the precipice of a world she did not belong to. The room was vast and minimalist. A single, low table of polished black lacquer dominated the space. And, at the table, sat a man. He didn't look up. His attention was fixed on a small, porcelain cup of tea he held between his fingers. All Chloe could see was the severe cut of his suit, charcoal gray, so dark it was almost black, tailored with a precision that seemed to carve him from the very air. The white cuff of his shirt was stark against his skin, and on his wrist, a watch with a dark leather band gleamed softly in the low light. Embarrassment washed over her, hot and sharp. She took a hesitant step into the room, the pain in her ankle flaring. She bowed her head, her curls falling forward to hide her face. "I am so sorry," she said, the words rushing out. "I am so incredibly sorry for being late. The train, the rain, there's no excuse."
"I'm sorry."
Silence. The only sound was the faint clink of porcelain as he set the cup down. He still hadn't looked at her. It was worse than being yelled at. It was being dismissed.
Erased.
She forced herself to stand up straight, to take another step toward the table.
"It was a mistake."
Her ankle protested, a sharp, grinding pain that made her gasp, a tiny, involuntary sound she immediately tried to swallow. That was when he moved. It wasn't much, just the slow, deliberate lift of his head. His eyes found hers, and the air in Chloe's lungs turned to ice. They were dark, impossibly dark, and held a stillness that was more intimidating than any overt anger. A thin, white scar cut through his left eyebrow, a flaw in an otherwise perfect, severe face. He said nothing. His gaze dropped from her face, tracing the line of her dress, and then it stopped. It stopped on her feet. He watched as she shifted her weight, a subtle, pained movement she had perfected over months. He saw the slight tremor in her leg as she fought to hold herself steady. He noticed the way she held her hands clasped in front of her, her knuckles white. His eyes, when they returned to her face, had changed. The dismissal was gone. In its place was a sharp, predatory focus. It was the look of a wolf that had just caught the scent of blood on the wind. "Sit," he said. His voice was low, a gravelly timbre that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. It was not a request. Chloe moved stiffly, her body screaming with each step, and lowered herself onto the silk cushion opposite him. The table between them felt like a mile-wide chasm. She kept her eyes down, fixed on the intricate grain of the lacquered wood. She could feel his gaze on her, dissecting her, peeling back the layers of her composure. Whispers had followed her here. Her friend, The well-meaning matchmaker had likely painted a picture of a bright, struggling university student. Ambitious.
Pretty.
Available. She had probably left out the parts about the second job, the cramped apartment with the landlord's leering son, the constant, grinding exhaustion. She had definitely left out the part about the accident on the stairs 2 days ago. The silence stretched, becoming a physical presence in the room. He made a small, almost imperceptible gesture with his hand. Chloe didn't see it, but she heard the soft rustle of movement behind the screen. Footsteps. A quiet exchange in Japanese. Then, the screen slid shut with a soft, final click. They were alone. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The scent of his cologne reached her then, subtle but unmistakable. Sandalwood and something cold, like winter air. It was the scent of power, of absolute control. For the first time in what felt like years, she saw the cold mask of his expression shift. It wasn't a smile. It was something far more unnerving. The hardness in his eyes softened, not with pity, but with a kind of grim understanding. It was as if he was looking right through her skin, through the carefully constructed walls she had built around herself, and seeing the fragile, bruised things she was hiding inside. He saw the suffering she had carried alone, and it seemed to resonate with something deep inside him. He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting flat on the table. The cuffs of his suit shifted, revealing the edge of intricate, dark ink coiling around his wrist. Yakuza. The realization hit her not with a jolt, but with a slow, sinking dread. This wasn't a good opportunity. This was a cage. "Who did this to you?" he asked. The question was quiet, almost gentle, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. It was direct, invasive, and stripped her of her last defense. No one ever asked. They saw her limp, they saw the shadows under her eyes, and they looked away. It was easier to look away. This man, this terrifying, silent man, was not looking away. He was looking right at the truth she was trying so desperately to hide. Chloe's throat went dry. She couldn't lie to him. The certainty of that was absolute. A lie would be an insult, and she had a chilling feeling that this was not a man one insulted. "I fell," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. On the stairs of my apartment building, Takahiro watched her, his expression unreadable. He didn't blink. "You are a bad liar, Chloe." He said her name. He said her name as if he owned it, as if he had the right to speak it into the silence of this room. It was different from how anyone else said it. It was heavier. Final. "The truth," he commanded, his voice dropping even lower. She took a shaky breath. The truth was ugly and pathetic. It was her landlord's son, Kenji, a boy with weak eyes and cruel hands who thought her rent being a day late was an invitation. He had cornered her on the landing. She had pushed him away, and he had shoved her back. Hard. Her ankle had twisted beneath her as she fell. She didn't tell him all of that. She couldn't. "It was an argument," she managed to say. "With someone at my building. It was an accident." "There are no accidents," he stated, a simple declaration of his worldview. "Only actions and consequences." He leaned back, the fabric of his suit rustling softly. "This person, does he often cause you to have accidents?" The question hung between them, laced with a quiet menace that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a memory, a shadow of an old pain. It was a wound, she realized, one that her own visible suffering had just touched. "I can handle it," she said, a pathetic attempt at defiance. A humorless smile touched his lips. "Pride is an expensive luxury, one that people in your position can rarely afford." His words stung because they were true. She couldn't afford to move. She couldn't afford to miss work. She couldn't afford to make a scene that might get her evicted. She was trapped. Takahiro seemed to read her thoughts. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim, black wallet. He extracted a thick stack of bills and placed it on the table, pushing it slowly across the polished surface toward her. "Find a new apartment," he said. "A car will be waiting for you downstairs. It will take you anywhere you want to go. My associate will handle the details of breaking your lease." It was a transaction. A simple, clean solution. He was solving a problem he had stumbled upon, the way a wealthy man might pay to have a piece of trash removed from his line of sight. It should have been a relief, a godsend. But Chloe looked at the money, then back at his impassive face. Taking it would mean she was indebted to him. She would be a project, a charity case, another piece of property in his vast, dark empire. And something inside her, a stubborn, foolish core of self-respect, refused. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Thank you, but no." For the first time, she saw a flicker of genuine surprise in his eyes. He tilted his head, studying her as if she were a puzzle he was just beginning to understand. No one, it seemed, said no to Takahiro.
Why?
"I don't want your money," she said. "I'll handle my own problems." "You are not handling them," he countered, his voice flat. "You are surviving them. There is a difference." She had no answer to that. He was right. She made a move to stand, to leave this suffocating room and the impossible man in it. The pain in her ankle flared, white-hot, and she sank back onto the cushion with a wince. He was on his feet in an instant, moving with a silent, fluid grace that was startling. He was beside her before she could react, his presence looming over her. She flinched, expecting anger, impatience. Instead, he crouched down in front of her. "Let me see," he commanded softly. Hesitantly, she lifted the hem of her dress just enough to reveal her swollen, bruised ankle. The sight of it, ugly and discolored under the room's soft light, was a fresh wave of humiliation. Takahiro looked at the injury, his jaw tight. He reached out, and his fingers brushed against her skin. His touch was not gentle. It was clinical, assessing. But it was also firm and steady, and it sent a strange, unexpected current of heat through her. He was so close she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the texture of his skin. The scent of sandalwood and winter was overwhelming. Their eyes met. His were dark pools, reflecting her own wide, startled expression. In that moment, the world outside the small space between them ceased to exist. There was only the pressure of his fingers on her skin, the intensity of his gaze, and the heavy, charged silence. He was no longer just a powerful man. He was a predator who had found his focus, and she was the thing that had captured his unwavering attention. He released her abruptly and stood. He pulled a phone from his pocket, a sleek, black device, and spoke a few rapid words in Japanese. Then he ended the call and looked down at her. "My doctor is on his way," he said. "You will not leave until he has seen you." That was the moment the floor dropped out from under her world. This was no longer a blind date gone wrong. It was a kidnapping of sorts, a gentle, quiet one, but a capture nonetheless. She had stumbled into the orbit of a dangerous man, and he was not letting her go. The doctor was an older man with kind eyes and brutally efficient hands. He examined Chloe's ankle in silence while Takahiro stood by the window, his back to them, looking out at the rain-slicked city. The doctor wrapped her ankle tightly, the professional wrapping providing more support than the cheap bandage she'd used. As he packed his bag, he spoke to Takahiro in low Japanese. Chloe only caught one word. "Fur away."
Old.
The doctor glanced at her with an expression of deep sympathy before bowing to Takahiro and letting himself out. The screen slid shut again. The silence was back, but it was different now. It was filled with the unspoken truth the doctor had confirmed. The new, angry purple of the sprain was laid over a canvas of older, fading yellow and green bruises on her shin. Evidence of a suffering that was not a singular event. "Kenji," Takahiro said, turning from the window. He spoke the name as if he had known it all along. The landlord's son. Chloe's blood ran cold. How could he know? "My men are very thorough," he said, answering her unspoken question. "They made some inquiries while the doctor was with you." He walked back to the table and sat, his movements deliberate. "He has a reputation for troubling young women who live in the building, especially those who live alone." A commotion erupted outside the room. Raised voices, a sharp command, the sound of a scuffle. Chloe's heart leaped into her throat. She knew that voice, whining, entitled, and furious. It was Kenji. Takahiro didn't even flinch. He simply watched her, gauging her reaction. The terror that flooded her face was all the confirmation he needed. He made another subtle gesture, and two of his men, broad-shouldered and impassive in black suits, entered the room. They bowed to Takahiro. He was making a scene in the lobby. One of them reported in Japanese. He said he followed the woman here. He was demanding to see her. Takahiro's eyes, fixed on Chloe, became chips of obsidian. To see her terror, to know that this pathetic worm had dared to follow her here, to his territory, ignited a cold, possessive fury in him. He had almost lost her, not to a rival clan's blade, but to the random, brutish violence of a common thug. It was an insult. It made things personal. "Take him," Takahiro said, his voice lethally soft. "Bring him to the warehouse in Shinjuku." The men bowed and left. The sounds outside ceased. Chloe was trembling, a visceral reaction to the near confrontation. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold herself together. Hours later, she was no longer in the restaurant. She was in a penthouse apartment high above the city, a place of glass and steel and unnerving silence. Her purple dress had been replaced with a simple black silk robe left for her. She had been fed, her ankle had been iced, but she was a prisoner. A well-cared-for one, but a prisoner all the same. Takahiro entered the living area where she sat huddled on a vast white sofa. He had changed out of his suit into a simple black shirt and trousers. The casual attire was somehow more intimidating. The ink on his arms was visible now, a breathtaking tapestry of dragons and peonies. He placed a phone on the glass table in front of her. "He is at the warehouse," Takahiro said, his voice calm. "He is asking for you." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I am giving you a choice, Chloe. You can tell my men to let him go. Or you can say the word and ensure he never bothers you, or any other woman, ever again." Chloe stared at the phone. It was a weapon. Her principles, the ones she had clung to her entire life, screamed at her. She wasn't a killer. She wasn't like him. But her survival instinct, honed by months of fear and intimidation, whispered a different story. The memory of Kenji's sweaty hands, his foul breath, the terrifying feeling of falling backwards down the stairs. She looked up at Takahiro. He was offering her power. The kind of absolute, terrifying power she had never known. The power to erase her fear. She couldn't say the word. She couldn't give the order. But she also couldn't bring herself to save the man who had hurt her. Slowly, she stood up, her newly bandaged ankle taking her weight. Without a word, she turned and walked away from the table, away from the phone, away from the choice. Her silence was her answer. It was her consent. She walked to the far end of the room, to the floor-to-ceiling windows, and stared out at the glittering expanse of Tokyo, her back to him. She had just crossed a line she could never uncross. The city lights blurred through the tears she refused to let fall. She felt his presence behind her long before he spoke. "You are not like them," he said, his voice close to her ear. "The ones in my world. You feel the weight of it." It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation. A diagnosis. She turned to face him, her expression raw. "And you don't." He met her gaze, his own eyes a vortex of darkness and history. "I chose to set the weight down a long time ago," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Being near you makes me want to pick it up again." The confession hung in the air between them, more dangerous and honest than any declaration of love. It was an admission of a shift inside him, a crack in the armor he had worn for years. And she knew, with terrifying certainty, that she was the cause of it. The next few days were a blur. Takahiro installed her in the penthouse, a gilded cage with an astonishing view of her prison. Guards were posted downstairs. Her old life was gone. She was told her things had been retrieved from her apartment, her lease terminated. It was all handled with quiet, ruthless efficiency. The danger, however, was not gone. It had simply changed its shape. Kenji, it turned out, was not just a landlord's son. He was the nephew of a minor lieutenant in a rival Yakuza clan. Takahiro's swift, brutal removal of him had been taken as a message, a territorial claim. And the rival clan decided to send a message back. They didn't come for Takahiro. They came for her. It happened on a Tuesday. Takahiro had, after much argument, allowed her to visit the university library. She was flanked by 2 guards, but she had insisted on the small piece of normalcy. On her way out, clutching a textbook, she noticed it. A black sedan, idling across the street. The same one that had been parked a block from the apartment building that morning. A warning bell, taught to her by one of Takahiro's men in a quiet, chilling lesson on situational awareness, rang in her head. Her guards noticed it too. Their posture stiffened. Back inside, one of them said, his hand moving to his jacket. But Chloe knew that was the wrong move. They would be cornered. Thinking fast, she shook her head.
No.
Shinjuku Station. The department store. It's too crowded there for them to try anything. She didn't wait for their approval. She turned and walked, not ran, toward the bustling entrance of the massive station complex, the guards falling into step around her. She was a student again, one of thousands pouring into the station. She ducked into the connected department store, a multi-level labyrinth of shoppers and noise. She wove through cosmetics, up an escalator to women's fashion, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She pulled out the phone Takahiro had given her. She didn't call him. She called the number for his second-in-command, a man named Ryota. "They're here," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. 2 men, black suits, following us in the KO department store. 3rd floor. I'm heading for the east exit loading docks. She was not a victim waiting to be rescued. She was an active participant in her own survival. She was using her intelligence, her knowledge of the city, to create an advantage, to lead her enemies into a trap. The loading dock was dark and smelled of garbage and rain. It was a calculated risk. Fewer witnesses. She and her guards flattened themselves behind a large dumpster just as the 2 men from the rival clan rounded the corner. They never stood a chance. From the shadows, more men appeared. Takahiro's men. It was over in seconds. A series of swift, brutal, almost silent movements.
No guns.
Just a chilling efficiency that left 2 men unconscious on the wet pavement. And then Takahiro was there. He emerged from the deepest shadow, not a speck of dust on his immaculate suit. He hadn't been part of the fight. He had simply been there to witness its conclusion. His eyes scanned the scene, then landed on Chloe. He walked toward her, his gaze sweeping over her, checking for any sign of injury. She was breathing hard, her knuckles white where she gripped her textbook. But she wasn't crying. She was steady. He stopped in front of her. The sounds of the city seemed to fade away. He reached out and gently took the book from her hands, setting it aside. Then he cupped her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. The cold mask was gone. In his eyes, she saw a raw, unguarded emotion that stole her breath. It was possession. It was relief. It was a claim. "You have a place," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "With me." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, an acknowledgement that she was no longer an outsider, a project, or a responsibility.
She was a part of his world now.
His center. The cost of that place was her old life. The simple, anonymous existence of a university student was gone forever, burned away in the alleys of Shinjuku. She was trading her freedom for safety, her past for a dangerous and uncertain future. She was choosing the cage. He noticed a long, red scrape on the back of her hand, from when she had brushed against the brick wall. He took her hand in his, turning it over to examine the wound. His hands, which she knew were capable of such breathtaking violence, were impossibly gentle. He pulled a pristine white handkerchief from his pocket and carefully dabbed at the scrape. He didn't look at her face. He kept his eyes fixed on her hand, his focus absolute. "This will not happen again," he murmured. It was not an apology. It was a vow, sworn to the gods of his underworld. A promise of blood and iron. Chloe looked down at their hands. His, large and powerful, the dark lines of his tattoos stark against his skin. Hers, small and trembling slightly, held securely in his grasp. She didn't pull away. She didn't say, "Thank you." The time for such meaningless pleasantries was long past. Instead, she curled her fingers a small, quiet movement and squeezed his hand. It was a silent acceptance, a choice made in the shadows of a city that had tried to swallow her whole. She was no longer just Chloe, the struggling student. She was his. And in the terrifying, lethal silence of his world, for the first time in a very long time, she felt completely and utterly safe.